Okay, let's get at it. We're studying the book of Psalms, and we are going to explore Psalm 25 through 30 this evening. And Psalms, of course, just by way of background review, is Israel's hymnal. They're poems really intended to be sung. It's poetry laced with strong theology. It's astonishing to realize how much theology is in the Psalms and how much eschatology or prophecy. The Hebrew term really means praises, and 55 of them are expressly addressed to the chief musician of the temple. In the Greek, the term is psalmoi in the Septuagint. That's a poem to be sung to a stringed instrument, or psalter, which is a harp or a stringed instrument, and it's from the Greek that we get our English term Psalms for this book. But the nature of poetry deserves some perception here. You and I are familiar with, in the West, of poetry that's phonetically designed, how it sounds, in two different ways. By its rhyme, we think of poetry as rhyming normally, one way or another, and also rhythm. There's a parallelism of time, both sound and time. That's what we think of as poetry, but not so in the East or in Hebrew. They deal in a conceptual design. They take it a notch higher in a sense. They deal with parallelism, not of sound or time, but of ideas. And there's at least three different kinds. You can actually start, if you get down this path, you can categorize them several ways, but the easy way is they're either comparative, where two lines are in comparison, that's to illuminate an idea, or contrastive or antithetic, where two lines are opposites to get an idea across. And sometimes they're completive or synthetic, as they say, where one completes the idea introduced by the other. Those are three patterns that we'll see all through the Psalms. And let me give you a piece of good news. I'm not going to try to analyze them. I want you to be aware of that, but I'm going to go the other way. You'll see in a little bit. There's also a term, there are many terms we'll encounter that are musical terms, but one repetitive term we'll run into again and again is Selah. And many people think that that is a pause. It really comes from to be lift up or to stop. So some people think it's a musical term. There are other experts that believe it's a pause to connect the ideas. It's a pause to consider. It's sort of a catch your breath and think through what we've just said kind of phrase. And so there's different views on that. But on this parallelism, there's synonymous parallelism. That's where the second line restates the first. Lord, who shall abide in thy tabernacle? Who shall dwell in thy holy hill? There are two lines that one just really restates the first. It's a form of emphasis. But again, the parallelism is conceptual, in this case synonymous. Another type of parallelism is antithetic parallelism. That's where it's just the opposite. The lines are in contrast to each other. An example is, for evildoers shall be cut off, but those that wait upon the Lord, they shall inherit the earth. Again, the two ideas that are in parallel are opposites to each other. And so that's a different example. Then there's synthetic parallelism, and this is where each successive line expands or complements or supplements the previous one. And the statutes of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. Those terms are not synonyms, but they're close synonyms, and they have slightly different implications. That's just an example that we explored when we were in Psalm 19. Psalms are sourced in many places. 73, virtually over half of them, are attributed expressly to David. There's a dozen of them to Asaph, the head of the choir, 12 to the sons of Korah, and then a couple of Solomon, and then a few others. And then there's actually a third of them that are anonymous. We're not sure who wrote them. They're just traditional hymns, if you will. But let's put a caveat out. You know, I tend to be an engineer by background. My specialty is information sciences. I tend to be a quantitative guy. And so I run the risk, and especially in a study like this, is to be over-analytic, to look at construction, look at details that are really irrelevant, really aren't going to help you embrace the Psalms. In some passages, especially in eschatology, that kind of precision and sensitivity to structure is crucial, but not here, I'm going to suggest. I want to caveat the other way so that we don't destroy the value of this for each individually. The emphasis in the Bible on animals is that ones that are clean are those that chew the cud. And that's not just a pun. It's, I think, an intended concept for us to understand. And that's what we're instructed to do. Jeremiah says, thy words were found, and I did eat them. John in Revelation 10 eats the little book, and so forth. That's an idiom that's, chewing the cud was the key to clean sacrifices. One of the things we don't want to do, especially in this study, is get into what I call analysis paralysis. We're so busy dealing with the structure, and we may miss the real gist of it. I don't know how many of you saw the movie The Dead Poets Society, where the instructor in the poetry class, first thing he had them do is read the first chapter of the textbook, and after they had, he said tear it out and throw it away, because he wanted them not to get involved in the analysis of structure. They wanted to understand what the poetry is. Well, that's sort of the kind of thing. I'm not going to ask you to tear any chapters out, but that's the idea. I don't want to blindfold our souls to what the real message in the Psalms are. And that also means I can't convey it to you. I want to give you enough comfort with it so that you can pick up where we leave off to indeed meditate on them, because that's the only way you're going to really get it, not by my prattling up here. So we're interested in prayerful absorption rather than intellectual dissection. And so that's your challenge. So we'll hit the highlights of some of these Psalms, but unless you take them and really meditate on them, you'll miss them. And when I give you a reading assignment for next week, there'll be maybe 5 Psalms for next week. Well, I want you to read them 75 times each. And you say, you want me to count? No, of course not. But the idea is I want you to really, don't just read them and say, okay, I'm ready now. No, meditate on, read it. You won't really absorb them until you've really had some immersion in them, okay? And so the Psalms are not an intellectual exercise. They are a gateway to the presence of God, and you want to treat it that way. Now, so we're going to talk about Psalms 25 through 30. Well, excuse me, we're in a section, Psalm 25 to 39. We're going to take through 30 tonight. All the preceding Psalms that we've had, remember Psalm 2 and Psalm 19, they were grabbers. They were dramatic, pretty much. So they've been what I'll call sensational. The next 15 are more personal. They're more quiet. They're more intimate. They won't have the razzmatazz that some of them did before, but they have a depth of relevance to our day-to-day lives that may surprise you. They're less familiar, but they have much to say to us. They're applicable. Every one of these Psalms are going to be applicable to the past, the present, and the future. In fact, I'm going to give you a paradigm that you can just try on and see if it helps you. If it doesn't help you, throw it away. It's just an idea. These Psalms have a past. We often try to estimate what was the predicament that caused David to pen that psalm. That can be useful. We notice that there were some Psalms that apparently had to do with the trauma that he went through with Absalom's rebellion. And that helps us try to understand what he was going through. But we're not sure that. Other Psalms were absolutely at a loss to figure out how on earth I don't know how he ever penned Psalm 22. That's hard to even contrive a set of circumstances that would cause him to generate a first-hand description by the Lord himself as he hung on the cross looking. I mean, come on, that's wild stuff. And also, as I go through the commentaries, more often than not, our estimate of the predicament David was going through is an estimate. It's hard to prove. It's just hopefully maybe helpful. The real issue of the psalm, in the present tense, is how does this impact Israel? Many of them have operative implications for Israel today and for the future. And that's when we start to maybe get a glimpse of how it can impact you and I personally in the present, today. How does any one of these psalms impact you today? For example, Psalm 22, gee, it's an astonishing portrayal of the crucifixion of Christ. Great, neat. How does that impact you today? Obviously, in many ways, but that's the point. That's the real issue. So we've got, in effect, three P's. If you've been in any decent seminary, something can't be true unless it's alliterative. It has to all start with the same letter, then you know it's true. And I'm being facetious, of course. But here we have the past, the present, and the personal. Those are three different dimensions, orthogonal dimensions probably, of the Psalms. unless it has a personal impact. You have to be able to answer the so what question. So what does that mean to me? Okay, I throw that out for what it might be worth. Let's just jump in. The first one of the evening will be Psalm 25. Now this psalm turns out to be, it's amazing to me, first of all, many commentaries don't even notice that it's an acrostic psalm. An acrostic psalm means that everything starts with, A, B, C. Each one starts with a successive letter of the Hebrew alphabet. But then when you start digging into the few psalm commentaries that called my attention to the fact that it's acrostic, I jumped into it. Turns out it's not acrostic exactly. It turns out it's a broken acrostic. There are 2 letters missing. And one of them established only by altering the punctuation of the Hebrew text as we received it. And then the last verse of the psalm breaks away from the alphabetic thing and just it breaks outside that scheme altogether. Now, the rabbinical literature suggests that this brokenness reflects the way troubles break the pattern of our of life itself. Whatever we've got going on in our lives is broken up. Life happens. That has different renderings on certain bumper stickers, but we'll just say life happens, right? Okay. See, if you look at Psalm 25 in the Hebrew, remember it goes from right to left. All languages flow towards Jerusalem, you know that. So it's from right to left. You have Aleph, Bet, Gimel, and so forth. Well, the Bet is missing. There isn't one that starts with a Bet. So if you take those out, then if you just drop those 2, then you'll discover that each letter, with those 2 exceptions dropped, are alphabetical. Each line starts with that sequential Hebrew letter in their alphabet, down to the Lamed in verse 11, and from 12 on, it's the Mem, and on it goes all the way to the Tau, which is 21, and then the last line of the psalm drops away from that whole schema. And so it's a broken acrostic. So the people say it's not acrostic are correct, and those that say that it's acrostic are correct. So the reason is it's a broken one, okay? So I don't know what you're going to do with that piece of information, but I thought I would. I wasted a lot of time trying to reconcile how could it be acrostic. I looked at it, and then finally, anyway, we sorted it out. Now, the first 7 verses are prayer. The next 3 are meditation. Then the next verse is a prayer. And then the next 4 are meditation. And then it finishes with a prayer. So it's prayer, meditation, syncopated to some extent. And again, we can't fully appreciate this because it was in Hebrew and it was intended to be sung. So we have no idea how that would have been communicated. But we do know from this psalm, it emphasizes the fact that life is a rough road. The word way appears 4 times in just a few verses, and the word path also. So it's all about the walk, life. And the psalmist cries out to God for wisdom as he makes his decisions in verses 4 and 5. He's surrounded by his enemies, we discover, and enemies who hate him, enemies who lay traps for him, and want him to fail. How many of you have been in that kind of a situation? Okay. We can make all kinds of conjectures as to what time in David's life was involved here, but it turns out there are a lot of candidates. But for 10 years, he was on the run, so it could have been any time during that. It could have been before then for some reasons. It could have been after. So I don't put a lot of stock on the conjectures that fill some of the commentaries, because they are just that, conjectures. But David knows he is a sinner and doesn't deserve God's help. That's emphasized. And yet he relies on the goodness and the mercy of the Lord. So David is in a very good place. He's in trouble. He's got problems. We can relate to that. Let's hope we can relate to the rest of it, because he knows he's a sinner. We know that. We are. And we know that we don't deserve anything. But we can rely on the goodness and mercy of the Lord, and therein that whole positioning is where Psalm 25 has a lot of relevance to every one of us sitting in this room. So let's go on. David succeeded in his journey because he held to 3 unwavering assurances. Unwavering assurances, and that's what we too need to cling to. The first one is the help we need comes from God. First 7 verses are really amplify that particular issue. Our God can be trusted. is what then is underscored in the next few verses. And of course, trusting God thus brings us to victory. It's that simple, it's that direct, and yet it's just that profound. Don't let the simplicity deny us the relevance of that to every one of us where we're sitting, no matter what's going on in your life right now. The help we need comes from God. God can be trusted, and trusting him will give us victory. That's the essence of this psalm. Let's just jump into Psalm 25, first 3 verses. It's a psalm of David, expressly so. And this is going to reveal the dependence that David had upon God. Unto thee, O Lord, do I lift up my soul. O my God, I trust in thee. Let me not be ashamed. Let not mine enemies triumph over me. Yea, let none that wait on thee be ashamed. Let them be ashamed which transgress without cause. David was a warrior, right? And woe to the warrior that discards his shield. And his shield, of course, is the Lord. It's interesting that let none that wait on thee be ashamed. Let them be ashamed which transgress without cause. Because shame is their fitting reward, is basically what David is declaring here. See, our help does come from God. This is a prayer that reveals the dependence David had upon God. Now, one day, Israel is going to also realize this the way David did. David understood it clearly in the Psalms. But these Psalms have an application to the nation also, both historically, present tense, and eschatologically, future tense. The day will come that Israel realize that their dependence does not come from the United States backing them. It's not going to come from the leadership sitting in the Knesset or wherever else. They're noticeably devoid of leadership, almost as devoid as America is. But the point is, one day Israel realized that their dependence their help can only come from God. Their dependence is on him. And the time will come when the remnant will find themselves in a position where there is no one whom they can depend on but God himself. And that's exactly what the tribulation is all designed for. The Great Tribulation, as Jesus labeled it, is a period of time in which they're going to be driven to the wall. And Jesus says so in Hosea 5, last verse of that chapter. I'll return to my place until they acknowledge their offense. How can he to return? He must mean he has left it. I'll return to my place until they acknowledge their offense. That's singular and specific. In their affliction, the great tribulation, they will seek me earnestly. And indeed they will. And it's good for us, you and I, to come to that same place. In a sense, we're a micro Israel also. We need to understand that our help comes from him. And that's our primary dependency. Let's move on. Verses 4 and 5 are probably in most of your memory list. Those of you that have been in the scripture memory probably will recognize 4 and 5 as being very familiar in any case. Show me thy ways, O Lord. Teach me thy paths. Lead me in thy truth and teach me. For thou art the God of my salvation. On thee do I wait all the day. There are 3 forms of guidance: moral, providential, and mental forms of guidance. They're all precious gifts of a gracious God. Moral, providential, and mental. They're gifts of a gracious God to a teachable people. The question is, are we a teachable people? You don't have to raise your hands, but are you a receptive student? Will these work with you? 4 times in just 2 verses, David applies for a scholarship in the College of Grace, if I can put it that way. Show me thy ways, O Lord. Teach me thy paths. Lead me in thy truth and teach me. For thou art the God of salvation. On thee do I wait most of the time? No, all the day. You betcha. Let's continue in verse 6. Remember, O Lord, thy tender mercies and thy loving kindnesses, for they have been ever of old. Remember not the sins of my youth, nor my transgressions. According to thy mercy, remember thou me for thy goodness' sake, O Lord. If you're an attorney in a courtroom, you place a great deal of emphasis on precedents. You build your case on precedents. Well, an unchangeable God, an immutable God, is the most effective argument to remind us of his ancient mercies and his eternal love. Because he is unchangeable, that's one reason our embracing the history of God's dealings is so valuable to us, because he has an unblemished record of faithfulness, and he's unchangeable. That's what David's calling upon here. Remember, O Lord, thy tender mercies and loving kindness, for they have been ever of old. Why is that relevant? Because he doesn't change. He's still that way. Remember not the sins of my youth. Indeed, David had some, but he repented of them. Nor my transgressions. According to thy mercy, remember thou me for my sake? No, for thy goodness' sake. God's reputation, in effect, is being appealed to here, Lord. So, okay, he had 308. We've just talked about the first 7 verses. The help we need comes from God. Let's go to the next unwavering assurances that David clung to. Our God can be trusted. See, when you pray, fix your eyes, as David did, on the fact that God is what? That he's good. That he's upright. That he's willing to instruct sinners. How condescending of him, but he's willing to do that. That he's loving. That he's faithful. That he's forgiving. These are significant, demonstrable, proven attributes of the God that we fix our eyes on. And that's what we do when we pray. And what confidence we have in prayer is not because we pray well, but because of the nature of the God to whom we pray. He's what it's all about. Not our skill, not our articulation. He's what it's all about. Our God is what we can trust, not our prayers. Our God is what we're trusting. Let's jump in. Good and upright is the Lord. Therefore will he teach sinners in the way. The meek will he guide in judgment, and the meek will he teach his way. All the paths of the Lord are mercy and truth unto such as keep his covenant and his testimonies. Again, it's a doing, not just hearing thing. For thy name's sake, O Lord, pardon my iniquity, for it is great. For whose sake? My sake? No, for thy name's sake. Interesting. So the psalmist is reiterating his prayer for instruction in the way, the same thing we had in verses 4 and 5 are echoed here again. But now his prayer, although it echoes verses in 4 or 5, it's grounded in the revealed character of God. What man is he that feareth the Lord? Him shall he teach in the way that he shall choose. The way it's been put by some is that he who fears God has nothing else to fear. Boy, that's a soldier's creed, isn't it? His soul shall dwell at ease, and his seed shall inherit the earth. The secret of, I love this one. I really love this one especially. The secret of the Lord is with them that fear him, and he will show them his covenant. This is an admission of confidential intimacy. It's not seeing is believing, believing is seeing. Neither natural wisdom nor human strength can force the door to this inner chamber. And anyone who doesn't understand the meaning of this verse will never learn it from any commentary. You either experience this by your relationship with him, or it's forever elusive to you. God has secrets. Amos 3:7 says, God will do nothing but that which he reveals to his servant the prophets. In Genesis 18, God reveals himself to Abram. Is Abram not my friend? Shall I not tell him what I'm going to do? And it goes on with other passages all through the scripture. Proverbs 25:2. It's the honor of God to conceal a thing, and the duty of kings to search out a matter. But there's also God, because of some of these secrets, it's his plan for your life. God has a plan for each of our lives. Jeremiah 29:11 highlights that, and all the way through the scriptures. God has a plan for our lives, and our great adventure is to discover what that is. Okay, let's take the third unwavering assurance that David has as he embraces this psalm. Trusting God brings us victory, David maintains. See, the enemies we have to conquer. What victory are we talking about? Well, we've got enemies to conquer. Danger. Have you ever experienced danger? All kinds. Have you ever experienced loneliness? Boy, David sure did. 3 of his sons, Absalom, Amnon, and Adonijah, turned against him. And also his close friend and counselor, Ahithophel. That was the aged advisor at his elbow that turned on him. Anybody know why Ahithophel turned on David, his trusted counselor, his inside help? Most people don't know this. Ahithophel was the grandfather of Bathsheba. And apparently he never really forgave David for having violated his granddaughter. That's a conjecture, but it's an interesting relationship. A broken heart. I won't ask for a show of hands, but how many of you have had that enemy to conquer? A broken heart over some situation. And regrets. Fear. I can remember once gripped in the deep darkness of fear. And in the depth of that darkness, I called Chuck Smith. I just placed a call to Chuck. I says, Chuck, what do you do when you're really terrified? And he gave me an answer I'll never forget. He says, focus on the love of God. And I did. In ways that I never want to forget. That he's there in those times. And of course, despair. David goes on, mine eyes are ever toward the Lord, for he shall pluck my feet out of the net. Now, a net is a common metaphor for temptation. Turn thee unto me and have mercy upon me, for I am desolate and afflicted. The ground of a quarrel is always ourselves. The ground of a quarrel is always ourselves. And when that's removed, there's nothing to prevent our full enjoyment of communion with God. What's in the way is us. How did that go in the comic strip? I've met the enemy and they are us, huh? How often that's true. The troubles of my heart are enlarged. Oh, bring thou me out of my distresses. Boy, they say when the sea is at its lowest ebb, the tide must surely turn. Once you know it's at the lowest ebb, that's great. But it's sort of like going down a roller coaster in the dark. You're not sure there is a bottom down there. Right? Anyway, David continues, look upon mine affliction and my pain, and forgive all my sins. Consider my enemies, for they are many, and they hate me with cruel hatred. And there's no hate that's so cruel as that which is unreasonable and unjust. It's less cruel if it's justified. What's really cruel if it's unjustified? The flip side of that is your hurts and resentments. The most dangerous ones are the justified ones. If you have a resentment that's justified, they're the dangerous ones because you won't let those go. If they're unjustified, you can rinse them off. But if they are justified, they're the ones that will keep you in bondage because you'll cling to them. Oh, keep my soul and deliver me. Let me not be ashamed, for I put my trust in thee. Let integrity and uprightness preserve me, for I wait on thee. That's where the acrostics complete. The last one is a tagline, an addition in a sense. It breaks away from the acrostic pattern. Redeem Israel, O God, out of all his troubles. So that's Psalm 25. Now, David closed that one with an emphasis on his integrity, and he had justifications for leaning on that. Psalm 26 is a strong affirmation of integrity, and it's a prayer that God would recognize it. At no time in the life of David clearly presents itself as an occasion for this passage. You can just study it all you like, and it's not clear that you can link some incident in his life to this particular psalm. So Psalm 26 is very similar to 25, except it does not include a prayer for pardon. The psalmist declared that he kept separate from sinners, that he identified himself with the worship of the Lord, and on this basis he prayed with the confidence the Lord would heal him, and so forth. So he has three requests in here. Vindicate me, examine me, redeem me. Short little psalm. Vindicate simply means to give me justice, defend my reputation. And David was a man of integrity, and there are lots of verses on that all through the Psalms and the history as we watch it. And the Lord himself affirmed his integrity in 1 Kings 9, verses 4 and 5. He's declared as having integrity there. And so when your character and conduct are attacked, it's not wrong to vindicate yourself, as Paul did in 2 Corinthians 10, or ask the Lord to vindicate you. You're not just defending yourself, you're defending the name of the Lord whom we serve. So that's may be surprising to many people. And there's many times, I know in my case too, where you're inappropriately accused, just let it pass. And that may be the right move in many places. And yet, I remember once, it's interesting, I was president of a corporation. I had just taken over at the request of the bank's public company. My number 2 man was the vice president of marketing. We had a meeting with some important people, and during which I sort of adopted sort of a humble posture. And I thought, that's the Christian thing to do. I was just sort of being casual. When the people left, the door closed, and my number 2 man, who was older than I was, but anyway, he a very seasoned professional. He closed the door with just the 2 of us, and he chewed me out. And I'll never forget that. He said, "Don't ever do that again. You're not Chuck Missler. You're the president of this company, and don't you ever do that again. Don't you ever demean the office you're sitting in." I thought I was being humble, and I realized from his point of view, I did something less than really represent the company in a positive, aggressive way. I've never forgotten that, because you can't separate the person from the office in a situation like that. And how often we're in that position where we're representing the king. There are times when it's important to put these 3 requests up there. Vindicate me, examine me, and then redeem me. Let's jump into Psalm 26. Judge me, O Lord, for I have walked in mine integrity, for I have trusted also in the Lord. Therefore I shall not slide. Examine me, O Lord, and prove me. Try my reins in my heart. For thy loving kindness is before mine eyes, and I have walked in thy truth. In verse, judge me, O Lord, for I have walked in mine integrity. His slanderers, David's slanderers, were described before, and they're also going to be detailed in subsequent verses here. Verse 2, examine me, O Lord, and prove me. Try my reins in my heart. Now, reins, by the way, technically the Hebrew word is for kidneys, but it's used in the sense that it's the seat of the emotions, like we use the term guts, okay? And the heart, of course, is the place of moral decision. And so, prove me. Try my reins in my heart. And so, for thy loving kindness is before mine eyes, and I have walked in thy truth. That's his declaration. I have not sat with vain persons, neither will I go in with dissemblers. I've hated the congregation of the evildoers, and will not sit with the wicked. I will wash mine hands in innocency, so will I compass thine altar, O Lord, that I may publish with a voice of thanksgiving and tell of all thy wondrous works. Does some of this sound familiar to you? Do you remember Psalm 1, the first psalm we studied? Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, or that sitteth or standeth in the way of sinners, or sitteth in the seat of the scornful. Remember that in Psalm 1? This echoes the same issue. David had a balanced life. He hated sin, but loved the things of God. Many of us make a stab at loving the things of God, but I'm not sure we have any. You can almost measure our spiritual maturity by the degree to which we hate sin the way God hates sin. I'm not talking hating sinners. God doesn't hate the sinners. He loves the sinner, but he hates sin. And David did this in the way he walked. In verses 1, 3, and 11, he emphasized the way he walks. Verse 12, how he stood and how he was sitting in verse 4. In other words, all his various postures, he kept himself from evil. That's his assertion that he could make before the throne of God. He hated sin but loved the things of God. Continuing verse 8, Lord, I have loved the habitation of thy house and the place where thine honor dwelleth. Boy, oh boy. Gather not my soul with sinners, nor my life with bloody men, in whose hands is mischief, and the right hand is full of bribes. Well, all this is about the same thing. We have sheep and goats and tares and wheat that are all mixed today. But the day is coming, and not very far away, when God will separate them and the wicked will perish. And if those of you that are jotting down references, you'll want to jot down not just Psalm 1, which we just made reference to, but also Matthew 7, 21 through 23, and Matthew 25, verses 31 to 46. Matthew 7, 21 to 23, and Matthew 25, 31 to 46 deals with that issue. But David continues, but as for me, I will walk in mine integrity, redeem me, and be merciful unto me. My foot standeth in an even place, in other words, on level ground. In the congregations, I will bless the Lord. So David's on level ground. He will not waver. He's got good footing. He's prepared to stand. So that's that little psalm. Okay, let's take Psalm 27. This one's got some surprises. Most of these are pretty straightforward. They're intimate. They're personal. They're relevant to each one of us. But Psalm 27 has a little sleeper in it. As far as I'm concerned, I'll let you judge for yourself. Let's just jump into Psalm 27. By the way, it's in the Septuagint. The annotation is that it was before he was anointed. So this is probably before he was exiled from his home and being hunted by Saul and his men and all of that. This may have been a very early psalm. But it speaks of three fears in here. The fear of circumstances in the first 6 verses. The fear of failure in the next 4 verses. And the fear of the future in the next 4 verses. So that's just one way to try to outline the psalm. I put it there for your use, but it's probably useless. I think outlining this is one of those places I don't think it's that useful. I think you just digest them, outline free. That may be a bad attitude for a commentator. I may be doing you a disservice, but I think you do better just to digest them on your own without the encumbrance of, commentary notes, except where maybe here and there they might be illuminating. Anyway, Psalm 27, verse 1, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Of whom shall I be afraid? John Knox is famous for saying, one with God is a majority. I like that. We've all heard that line. I was intrigued to discover it really came from John Knox originally, apparently. When Cromwell was asked why he didn't fear anyone, he said, I have learned that if you fear God, you have no one else to fear. And that explains a lot of his conduct. Continuing verse 2, when the wicked, even mine enemies and my foes, came upon me to eat up my flesh, they stumbled and fell. Right? If God be for us, who can be against us, is the way Paul summarizes it in Romans 8. David continues, though a host should encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war should rise against me, in this will I be confident. One thing have I desired of the Lord, that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple. Psalm 26, 27, and 28 also will reveal David's love for God's sanctuary, his focus on the sanctuary. And by the way, in that day, it wasn't the temple. It hadn't been built yet. It was the tabernacle up in Mount Zion. And God would later let David provide the materials and gave David the plans for the temple that Solomon later built. But it's interesting here how confident he is. On the one hand, he's confident of victory. But verse 4 is a fascinating verse that I can attest to personally. In my life, I have been blessed out of my socks. I came from a wonderful home, very modest home, but a very wonderful home. In school, in those days, the school system I was in was outstanding. It's no longer that way, but it was then. I was able to coast through college with the incredible high school background I did have from the LA City schools in those days. I stood high in the class. I had an aptitude for technical things, and that allowed me to coast through a lot of interesting adventures. I was heading for a doctorate. I was going to go for a PhD in EE at Stanford when I got the academy appointment, and the glamour of that attracted me, and it gave me a passion for adventure I've never lost. And I won't bore you with all of that, except I was always at the right place at the right time and had an incredible array of adventures, both at the academy and the Air Force subsequent, and then in think tanks and the defense industry following, and I could go on and on. But I got to a point where I was at a crossroads of a number of ways, and I was visited by Hal Lindsey, who grabbed me by the scruff of the neck, so to speak, and said, "Chuck, what do you enjoy most doing?" He knew what the answer was, because all through those adventurous years, my hobby, my outlook, was Bible studies. That's what I did for fun. He said, "What do you enjoy doing most?" And he knew the answer was, "I just love Bible studies, always have." He said, "Ever thought about doing that full time?" I never took myself seriously in Bible study. I taught the Monday night studies at Calvary, but that was a recreation. I did that as casually as some people might teach Sunday school class on Sunday or something, Just it's something I did, but I did for some years, and the tapes from that went around a lot of places. But so I had a following of sorts. But Hal said, "You ever thought about doing it full time?" And I told him I never felt that I felt called to be a pastor. He said, "You don't have to be. Because with your following, you normally can't make it as an independent. With your following, you could. Once you give it a try, that way you won't get rich, but you could probably survive, and you could do what you like best." And okay, give that a try, and we did, and the Lord blessed it. But when I read Psalm 27, verse 4, I can relate to this because I have a second career for the last 15, 20 years, whatever it's been, doing what used to be my hobby. I get to do what I do full time. I get to study the Bible full time. And a lot of the onerous chores that accompany this, I've got people that have picked up the ball. I really have a free ride. Went to Israel. And when the water's cold and there's baptism, and Dan did it for me. Wherever I turned, there was something that wasn't really, particular track. Dan just jumped in, and I had a free ride. Had a blast. Around here, I get supported incredibly well. We just had a conference at the Coeur d'Alene Resort. That's one of the most phenomenal conferences I've ever been involved in, never attended even, let alone be involved in. And all kinds of people are doing all this tough stuff, making sure that all the T's are crossed and I's dotted. And I just got a chance to get up there and shoot my mouth off and mix with people who love the Lord. And so I look at this. I can sit with David. "One thing have I desired of the Lord, and that will I seek after." This is David talking. "That I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, and to behold the beauty of the Lord, and to inquire in his temple." I am doing that as close as it's possible to do in this earthly life right now. I spend my time, not all my time obviously, but most of my time, pouring through commentaries, tracking down little treasures tucked in corners that other people have missed. That's my biggest kick, is discovering something in the Word. I'll meet with my rabbinical friends, and they'll show me something that I never knew about in the Old Testament, and I come home with a nugget. That's a joy. There's nothing more fun than that, and so forth. So I can relate to what he's saying here. Now, he's saying it in a broader sense, of course, but I can understand that passion. That's what David was. David was a warrior. He was king. No, what he wanted to do is just behold the beauty of the Lord, inquire in his temple. Man, that's great stuff. "One thing have I desired of the Lord, that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life." That's it. That's it. Now, let's watch carefully what's emerging in Psalm 27 in verses 5 and 6. David continues, "For in the time of trouble, he shall hide me in his pavilion." Really? "In the secret of his tabernacle shall he hide me. He shall set me up upon a rock." That's David's exclamation. I think it's an emotional exclamation. "In the time of trouble he shall hide me in his pavilion. In the secret of his tabernacle shall he hide me. He shall set me up on a rock. And now shall mine head be lifted up above mine enemies round about me. Therefore will I offer in his tabernacle sacrifices of joy. I will sing, yea, I will sing praises unto the Lord." Wait a minute. Time out. Is it possible that in David's flow of words here, the Holy Spirit did some editing? Is it possible the Holy Spirit has put a little hint in here about something? Let me tell you frankly, one of the most authoritative seminaries in the country, Dallas Theological Seminary, would argue what I'm about to tell you or suggest to you. They would refute this possibility. So I want that being understood. I'm going to show you something that would be at least controversial. I want you to take a look at verse 5 very carefully. "For in the time of trouble," what does that mean eschatologically? Great tribulation? "In the time of trouble, he shall hide me in his pavilion." What on earth is that? "In the secret of his tabernacle," that's where he's dwelling, "shall he hide me. He shall set me up upon a rock." Now, Paul would make the case in 1 Corinthians 10:4 and other places that the rock refers to Christ in general, as a metaphor. It may or may not here, but let's assume it does. This leads to a conjecture. I'm among those that suspect that the rapture of the church is hinted at 3 times in the Old Testament. This is one of them, Psalm 27:5, that we've just stumbled into. Let's take a look at Isaiah 26, starting at verse 17 through 21. Isaiah 26, verse 17. It says, "Like as a woman with child, that draweth near the time of her delivery, is in pain, and crieth out in her pangs, so have we been in thy sight, O Lord." Birth pangs. What does Matthew say? All these things are the beginning of sorrows? No, birth pangs. Not really. "We have been with child, we have been in pain, we have, as it were, brought forth wind. We have not wrought any deliverance in the earth, neither have the inhabitants of the world fallen." Now get the next, I'm just giving you some context. These are the verses that I want you to focus on. "Thy dead men shall live. Together with my dead body shall they arise." Sounds like a resurrection to me. "Awake and sing, ye that dwell in the dust. For thy dew is as the dew of herbs, and the earth shall cast out the dead." Get this verse. This is my favorite. Isaiah 26:20. "Come, my people, enter thou into thy chambers, and shut thy doors about thee. Hide thyself, as it were, for a little moment, until the indignation is passed over." Come, my people. How many of you are God's people? Got most of your hands. That's pretty good. Okay. "Enter thou in thy chambers. In my Father's house are many mansions. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I'll receive you unto myself, that where I am, there may you be also." John 14 and following, next few chapters. Go through all that. "Come, my people, enter thou into thy chambers, and shut thy doors about thee. Hide thyself, as it were, for a little moment." We're not going to be here during the indignation, is what I think is the harpazo is all about. Hide ourselves, as it were, for a little moment, until the indignation. What's the indignation? The wrath of God. Called the indignation in a number of places. You can chase that down, look it out for yourself, for what it's worth. "Come, my people, enter thou in thy chambers." Because then it continues, "For behold, the Lord cometh out of his place to punish the inhabitants of the earth for their iniquity. The earth also shall disclose her blood, and shall no more cover her slain." The word blood there is in the plural, if that means anything special. So So I leave that with you. There's one more that I'll just throw in here to cause confusion, discussion on your way home. In Zephaniah, chapter 1, verse 18, and the last verse of chapter 1, the first couple of verses of chapter 2. I was putting this slide together this afternoon when I got a call from a friend of mine in Fresno, California, who's asking me a question about Zephaniah chapter 1, verse 18. I thought that's kind of interesting. It says, funny you should mention, Scott. Guess what I'm doing right now? It happened, you know. And of course, there is no such thing. Coincidence is not a kosher word, the rabbis remind us. Zephaniah says, neither silver nor gold shall be able to deliver them in the day of the Lord's wrath. But the whole land shall be devoured by the fire of his jealousy. Ooh, that's a frightening phrase. The fire of God's jealousy. Ooh. For he shall make even a speedy riddance of all them that dwell in the land. Gather yourselves together, yea, gather together, O nation, not desired or not desirous. That can go either way there in that translation. Before the decree bring forth, before the day passes the chaff, before the fierce anger of the Lord come down upon you, before the day of the Lord's anger come upon you. Then you get the verse I'm after, verse 3, Zephaniah 2:3. Seek the Lord, all ye meek of the earth, which ye have wrought in his judgment. Seek righteousness, seek meekness. It may be ye shall be hid in the day of the Lord's anger. That's kind of cool. I wouldn't build doctrine from any one of these verses, certainly not this last one. It could just be referring to those that are protected through the tribulation. That may be what it's referring to. But I just think these are three interesting little verses. You may want to include your notes when someone says, the rapture's not in the Old Testament. You say, well, maybe it isn't, but let me show you three verses. Okay. So that's Zephaniah 2:3. Okay, getting back to Psalm 27. Hear, O Lord, when I cry with my voice, have mercy also upon me and answer me. When thou saidst, seek ye my face, my heart said unto thee, thy face, Lord, will I seek. Hide not thy face far from me. Put not thy servant away in anger. Thou hast been my help. Leave me not, neither forsake me, O God of my salvation. When my father and my mother forsake me, then the Lord will take me up. Teach me thy way, O Lord, and lead me in a plain path because of mine enemies. Verse 10 has been widely misunderstood by the critics. In fact, even Delitzsch, one of the most profound of the exegetes, suggests this verse could have been written by someone else. Why? Because David's father and mother did never forsake him. That's because they haven't translated it properly. The reason that possibly is even considered is because of David's history. Actually, the term "when my father" should be translated, "had my father and my mother forsaken me, then the Lord will take me up." In other words, when in the sense of if. It's not when as a point of time, it's when as a point of condition. So it's a translational difficulty that many people misunderstand. So it's not saying that your father and mother will forsake you. It's saying that should they do that, God will take you up. That's really what it's saying. That's simple. That way, it's obviously quite simple. Teach me thy way, O Lord, and lead me in a plain path because of mine enemies. Deliver me not over to the will of mine enemies, for false witnesses are risen up against me, and such as breathe out cruelty. And I was going through various commentators on this verse, and I was delighted by J. Vernon McGee. On this verse, he says, I always prayed to the Lord, do not let me fall into a position where I'm at the mercy of the church leaders or a church board. And, I thought about that. One of the reasons I've been so comfortable in my ministry for my 60 years as a Christian is because in that entire time, I've never been on staff. Even at Calvary Chapel, I taught the Monday night Bible studies there for 25 years, but I was not on staff. I just taught Monday night Bible studies. And I've harbored that cynical attitude that I even got as a teenager about church boards. And I was amused with J. Vernon's candor as he puts that in his commentary. I've always prayed to the Lord, do not let me fall in a position where I'm at the mercy of church leaders or a church board. And so David said, deliver me not over to the will of mine enemies, for false witnesses are risen up against me, and such as breathe out cruelty. It's tragic to realize how much of the church politics is based on slander, hearsay, and not facing your accusers, and gossip. Organizations run on gossip. It's tragic. Anyway, David continues, I had fainted unless I had believed to see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait on the Lord. Be of good courage, and he shall strengthen thine heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. And so Andrew Bonar, one of my favorite commentators in Leviticus, made the remark, let us be as watchful after the victory as before the battle. Before a battle, we should be very watchful, obviously, as a warrior. But when the victory is won, you should be no less watchful. And Stuart Hamblen, in one of his songs, said, I know not what the future holds, but I know who holds the future. That's another way to look at the whole thing. Okay. And we can squeeze in a couple more here maybe. The book of Psalms, Psalm 28. These are short ones. We'll zip through it. This wonderful little psalm has a cry. And David's in trouble here. The links between 26, 27, it suggests that David is still in the same life-threatening situation as we've inferred from the previous ones. And prophetically speaking, this may be referring to Israel in the tribulation. It's a prayer of judgment upon enemies and a praise for the deliverance they know will come, basically. Psalm 28 gives the problem of unanswered prayer in the first 5 verses, the joy of unbounded praise in the next couple of verses, and the promise of undeserved blessing as the wrap-up, last couple of verses. Psalm of David, Psalm 28, unto thee will I cry, O Lord, my rock. There's that rock again. Be not silent to me, lest if thou be silent to me, I become like them who go down to the pit. Hear the voice of my supplications when I cry unto thee, when I lift up my hands toward thy holy oracle. You hear the desperation in his voice? Draw me not away with the wicked and with the workers of iniquity, which speak peace to their neighbors, but mischief is in their hearts. Give them according to their deeds, and according to the wickedness of their endeavors. Give them after the work of their hands. Render to them their desert. Because they regard not the works of the Lord, nor the operation of his hands, he shall destroy them, he will not build them up. Blessed be the Lord, because he hath heard the voice of my supplications. The Lord is my strength and my shield. My heart trusted in him, and I am helped. Therefore my heart greatly rejoiceth, and my song, and with my song I will praise him. The Lord is their strength. He is the saving strength of his anointed. Save thy people, and bless thine inheritance. Feed them also, and lift them up forever. The word feed here, by the way, is to shepherd the people, is what it actually says. And to lift up, the word there is like you would carry a child. And you remind, of course, of Isaiah 40, verse 11, he shall feed a flock like a shepherd. He shall gather the lambs in his arms, carry them in his bosom, and he shall gently lead those that are with young. We sing that as a song. It's from Isaiah 40, verse 11. And Jesus himself reminds us that, says, save thy people. Salvation is of the Jews, he tells the Samaritan woman in John 4, if you may recall. Okay, let's slip in a couple of more short ones here. The book of Psalms, Psalm 29. This is the storm psalm. And there's something interesting in this because 7 times we hear the voice of the Lord. It's mentioned. And none other than Delitzsch calls this the voice of the 7 thunders that you encounter. Not implicitly suggesting that this is an allusion to Revelation chapter 10, verse 4. Remember the 7 thunders that utter their voices, but John was not allowed to write down what they said. But this psalm does describe a storm, the gloom of a tempest, the clap of thunder, the flash of lightning, and there's terror on all sides. So, the Psalm of 7 thunders, according to Delitzsch. Ewald says this psalm is elaborated with a symmetry of which no more perfect specimen exists in the Hebrew. Psalm of David. Give unto the Lord, O ye mighty, give unto the Lord glory and strength. Give unto the Lord the glory due to his name. Worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness. Emphasis on the glory up front. Now it starts with the voices. The voice of the Lord is upon the waters. The God of glory thundereth. The Lord is upon many waters. So we have a storm brewing here. It starts out at sea with power and majesty. Some commentators even visualize David in his palace, which is on high ground, watching this come in over the sea from the north. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is full of majesty. The voice of the Lord breaketh the cedars. Yea, the Lord breaketh the cedars of Lebanon. He maketh them to skip like a calf. Lebanon and Syrian are like a young unicorn. The voice of the Lord divideth the flames of fire. So you got lightning going on, and so on. So we have, it's coming ashore from the north. That would be in Lebanon, verses 5 to 7. Sirion is a term for Mount Hermon, which is in the the before Lebanon range, about 9,000 feet in altitude, or 2,700 meters if you're in that world, the highest in Israel. I try to put it for metric for our European audiences, but if God wanted us in the metric system, he would have had 10 disciples, right? Okay, listen. Even the solid fabric of the world seems to rock under the impact of this storm. This is a big storm that's idiomatically coming here. The voice of the Lord shaketh the Lord shaketh the wilderness of Kadesh, that's in the south. The voice of the Lord maketh the hinds to calve, discovereth the forests, and his temple doth everyone speak of his glory. So now we come through to the south, to Kadesh, last few verses, and that's in the extreme south of Judah, in Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 19. The Lord sitteth upon the flood, yea, the Lord sitteth king forever. The Lord will give strength unto his people. The Lord will bless his people with peace. And we have, in effect, an epilogue in the last two verses. So Jewish worshipers use Psalm 29 in their synagogues in their celebration of Hag Shavuot, Feast of Weeks, also called in the Greek, Feast of Pentecost. The early church and many denominations today use Psalm 29 in their celebration of Pentecost. Same season, but why? The Jews have their reasons, I guess, but the church has their reasons because of Acts 2. You may recall in Acts 2, we had a rush of a mighty wind. We had tongues of fire, the lightning. There's some reasons from a church point of view that it would seem to fit Acts chapter 2. So I think that's kind of fun. So I'll leave that with you to chew on, and let's take one more to finish off the evening, Psalm 30. This is a psalm of thanksgiving. It deals with a new victory, going from death to life in the first three verses. A new day from night unto morning, verses 4 and 5. And a new heart from pride to humility. And a new song from mourning to rejoicing. That's a quick profile of this psalm of thanksgiving. And this is at the dedication of the house of David. Now, there's a lot of debate among the commentators. What does that mean? Some feel, well, it's the dedication of his palace, which he did first. And indeed it might be. There's some reasons why it seems it could be tied to 2 Samuel 5. But the other theory is that it's tied to 2 Samuel 24. And remember when David numbered the people, and there was the plague that 70,000 died before that was averted, and so forth. So his pride got him in big trouble there, as you may recall. And so the dedication, it was sung at the dedication of the temple, commemorating the trauma that led up to that. So let's give it, it's the second of the two theories that I tend to lean to, but we're just guessing. Verse 1, I will extol thee, O Lord, for thou hast lifted me up and hast not made my foes to rejoice over me. O Lord, my God, I cried unto thee, and thou hast healed me. O Lord, thou hast brought up my soul from the grave. Thou hast kept me alive, that I should not go down to the pit. Sing unto the Lord, O ye saints of his, and give thanks at the remembrance of his holiness. For his anger endureth but a moment, and in his favor is life. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. See, clear David had gone through some dark times and things had gotten better. In my prosperity, I said, I shall never be moved. Lord, by thy favor, thou hast made my mountain to stand strong. Thou didst hide thy face, and I was troubled. I cried to thee, O Lord, and unto the Lord I made supplication. What profit is there in my blood when I go down to the pit? Shall the dust praise thee? Shall it declare thy truth? Hear, O Lord, have mercy upon me. Lord, be thou my helper. Thou hast turned for me my mourning into dancing. Thou hast put off my sackcloth and girded me with gladness, to the end that my glory may sing praise to thee and be not silent. O Lord, my God, I will give thanks unto thee forever. The thou hast has been appeared in here 7 times, by the way. The focus is on what God has done. So that's it for tonight. We zipped through a few of these. For your next session, Psalm 31 through 37 would be a good shot. In other words, read the next 7 Psalms. I'm not sure we'll get through all of them in the next session, but we'll see how we go. But don't just read them through once. Try to digest them, see what you can infer from them without the distraction of any weird notes that I add to your notebook. So with that, let's stand for a closing word of prayer.